I'm being told sound is a little soft, which is not good. Let me check my levels. Can you hear me now? Let's try that again. Better? Is it live or is it Memorex? That's right. This is Journey of an Aesthete podcast, and that thing that you did not hear, we had a little audio tech glitch because, again, when I'm doing these shows, I'm a one-man band, one-man show here, and I have to create settings for different types of shows. So whether I'm one person or several people, and I just did a concert here. Hopefully that you'll tune in and watch if you haven't already with my trio on Sunday. And maybe I have levels set for that. That's different. I don't know. But I have my ace producer, Laurie Strickland, and her trusty companion dog, Chester, in the room in the lobby here to check everything out. And if you can let me know how it is, I hope it's okay. God, I'm sorry about that. This happened once before. I did a episode where I played some piano, and the piano again did not come through because sometimes it's set up for speech, sometimes it's set up for music, and that's why it's always a good idea to check, make sure it's different from every episode is different. So where are we today? This is the 20th, number 20, episode 20. Of All About Aesthetics. So I've been doing this 20 episodes on this series. So 20th. And it's kind of exciting that I've done that many about all sorts of topics. I think if I think back, I did some things on 70s movies. I've done programs about, color and aesthetics and 80s malls and, all sorts of topics. As you know, if you're following our show regularly, we did a two-parter on network television in the so-called, well, I don't know if it was a golden age. It was the analog age of network nighttime television. Johnny Carson, David Letterman, Arsenio Hall, etc. And I was thought I'd talk a little bit about what I was doing in that first before we get to today's topic, because it's actually rather connected. So we are dealing with, in these episodes in particular, not all. I threatened that I would do a show on Stan Brakhage. Heaven forbid, right? Or a show on something very obscure, unusual. I'm not necessarily going to, but what I'm saying is that just pulling a name out of a hat. Experimental filmmaker. I might do, because it's very topical now, do a show just on Yoko Ono's film Rape, which is an extraordinary film. I don't know if that's being talked about much now. I know I only mention that because there's this new thing on Yoko Ono and a biography, and so I letting you know that I've seen her early films projected properly. When I used to live in Massachusetts, we'd go and watch Yoko Ono's films, on Warhol's films of those years. And I, of course, I'm only teasing. I mean, I might do an episode devoted to that rather interesting, difficult film of hers. Just for fun, or just because I think it's worthy of doing, or just because she's, of course, a great artist in her own right, alongside the Beatles, and also because that's what's on people's minds now, and that raises a lot of philosophical questions about what to cover, what art is. I'm going from network television, and so alongside the world of network television of the 70s, 80s, and 90s is magazines and newspapers, well, in particular magazines. And today we're going to talk a little bit about magazine culture those years, which is very much related to commercial network television, because a lot of the content of the commercial magazines, of course, was paid for by advertisers and companies, and big companies at that. So that's nothing new. And so I'm going to make sure the sound is okay. What I was going to say about that theme song, which you didn't get to even hear, is that now you've heard it 20 times, or should I say 19 times, 19 and a half times. And that piece, that little theme, I guess, mini theme, is unfinished. I've been playing it 19 times to introduce this series. I always sit at the piano, and it's slightly different every time, but it's unfinished. In other words, I don't know fully all the ins and outs of that theme. I only know some of it, and yet I sit here every month, once a month, and play it. That's interesting, isn't it, to do that? So I usually start with talking about what I'm wearing, which relates to what we're going to discuss very at the outset. We'll get to Graydon Carter, don't worry. We're in a time of year now when it's a little tricky deciding what I'm going to wear because of the climate and the season and the volatility. There's no better word for the weather here is to describe it as volatile. Where it can go, it's going to go down to 40 tonight, and it was 80 yesterday. Or close to 80. Or sometimes within the same day. And so it makes dressing the environment a little bit difficult. So this is what I would call an in-between cloth, because it's a twill and it's strong and it's substantial. In navy, very traditional, but it's light enough so that you can wear it many months out of the year. So it's sort of a tropical. It's lighter than a fall or winter weight, and it was made for me, of course. And I'm wearing gray trousers with it, which is very, very classic, very, very traditional clothing. And there is, believe it or not, I don't know what to call it, a spiritual relationship between me and Mr. Graydon Carter. Believe it or not. And Fran Lebowitz. Look what I have here. This is a book about a great Savile Row tailoring firm. Look at how heavy. Things that have volume and mass. We're away from the screen. We've left TV, and we're into things like this. And this is their window. But Graydon Carter, of course, was a customer, as you can see here. Here is Graydon Carter and Fran Lebowitz together wearing the great clothes of Anderson and Shepard. Two pictures of them wearing evening clothing, which is kind of interesting. What year was these photos taken? This is some time ago, so I'm going to look and see. Get out my glasses. 2008, so there's something to think about. And it's connected to sort of what I'm wearing today. It's in the same mode or the same the same mode of dress. And while we're on the subject of clothes, there were magazines in the past that dealt with clothing, and some of the very first magazines I ever purchased when I came to Boston in the 80s I'm talking about ages 17, 18, 19, 20, were magazines like Gentleman's Quarterly or GQ, and Esquire. And if you look behind me here, I've shown you this before, but here we go. As a teenager, I subscribed to American Film Magazine. So I was reading about Heaven's Gate in 1979, 1980. And for proof that this is what there's my, where are we here? Yep. There I am, Mitch Hampton. Yep. Mitch Hampton, Tampa, Florida. I would have been 14, 15 years old. So your host of Journey in the Sleep podcast was doing things like subscribing to American Film Magazine, subscribing to Downbeat Magazine. I also subscribed to Contemporary Keyboard, music magazines, things that interested me. But they're all magazines. They're all magazines. And so I could say in the culture of the 80s and 90s, they had things called newsstands. These little on street corners, and they were little, I don't know, they were sometimes large, sometimes very tiny, sometimes it was like a shoebox or a kiosk, and you would have all of these magazines, and people would buy all kinds of magazines. And so let me show you some things, some of the oldest magazines I have here. What do I got? What do I have here? Let's see. Never know what I'm going to pull out on my shows. Where is it? Here you go. This is from the 80s, 1987, and this is a magazine called M, which was sort of a kind of a more upscale GQ for people that thought GQ was too commercial or too downgrade in taste. Wanted something even better, they would read this M magazine. And of course, since it's the 80s, there's an article on SEC insiders and tweeds. And are you a straight arrow? And if you just open this up, you can see Robert Bryan was the publisher of this magazine, who is still around, I believe. You can see a Calvin Klein ad from the 80s, Obsession. Iconic ad of the 1980s. And you could see 80s clothing. I mean, good versions of 80s clothing, not bad versions, but still nevertheless. 80s clothing. Where are we here? Very, very loud patterns, of course, like this. And that's a magazine. Article on Gary Hart. See how this is falling apart as I show you excerpts of this as art coming apart. That's the thing about physical artifacts and media. They are vulnerable. They are, they are. This is typical of a magazine in that era because they would cram a lot of things onto a page. Cram little things onto a page. Little tidbits like this. Interesting to look at the 80s. So how many of these have I saved from 40 years ago? Hardly anything. I am the opposite of, I guess the opposite of a hoarder, if that's fair to say. I don't know much about hoarding. What I mean is that I try to save things, but I try to save like one or two of a thing. So I'm always forever curating and kind of recycling and throwing things away, even though I like to collect. So it's a kind of a balance for me. So I try to fit everything into this bag that's related to this subject. So that's how I organize my life. So I can go in here and I can, what do I have here? Messages coming in. Go into my bag and see things I've saved. It's fun to do this. Very interesting. Also from 1987, this comes from Esquire. Esquire, there's the date. '87. Can you see that? And they're announcing to the world how men are supposed to dress in the 80s and the 90s. And look at here. You can see this is what they're recommending. Esquire 1987, and as you can see, it's not too far apart of what I'm wearing right now. And that there's a little bit of excess fabric on purpose, which was the Anderson and Shepherd style that I showed you at the outset, Fran Lebowitz and Graydon Carter, today's subject, wearing. So that's interesting. I should also say that for the past 20 years, the silhouette, as we say for men, has been the exact diametric opposite than what I just showed you what I'm wearing. Extremely tight silhouette, very, very, very low rise trousers, tiny, tiny, little lapels, almost like a little bit of size too small. And so styles change. People wear different clothes in different eras. And I'm following as is tradition for this show, talk a little bit about clothes on the outset, and we'll get to some non-sartorial subjects here. I had the opportunity to read this book. There's Graydon Carter again, a little younger than the photo I just showed you. That's probably him in '94, I'm guessing, not 2008. And I'm going to read from this book and talk about a little bit even more about magazines. So, you get a magazine in those years, and it had a lot of stuff in it. And every magazine did something different. I want to show you something else now. Graydon Carter was Vanity Fair, known for Vanity Fair for a lot of his career. He starts in Vanity Fair in 1992. And towards the end of his I guess you call his reign there, the magazine started to change a little bit. It got, like all magazines did, because of the internet, because of screens that you're watching this on now, got thinner and thinner and thinner. So if they used to be thick magazines, they got thinner. So today's Vanity Fair is something like this. Very, very thin. Right? Very, very thin. For a point of contrast, this is an Esquire magazine from 1983. How We Lived. Open this up. Lots of content. Lots of articles in this. Here's a GQ magazine from the 90s. Oh, where are we here? 1990 to be exact, which we're still in the 80s in 1990. And I'm sure I've shown you this before. This says David Letterman on the cover. Is he the king of hip? Is he still the king of hip? Is he this or is he that? And if you look inside, in the center you can see is Donald Trump going broke, is one of the articles. Another article defending Vanessa Williams, and a profile of Frank Rich, the former theater critic turned political commentator. Isn't he a political commentator now? I think he's changed his concerns a little bit. It's fun to look at 1990 and see what was in a magazine, and then, you know. Here's a profile of Andrew Young. Andrew Young. So, people would get this magazine and read about Andrew Young. Not just Georgians, but all over the U.S., people were curious about him and his campaigns and his beliefs. Just to name one example. And of course, the way clothes are shown is always changing. These things go through. Yeah, here's Frank, the article on Frank Rich. I love showing you these magazines because it's really fun to show volume, unleash volume and mass here, and get away from always looking at a screen to see something, to see things that have, you know, materials. Here's The Most Powerful Man on Broadway by Chip Brown. Chip Brown's a really good writer. Chip Brown, of course, is mentioned in Graydon Carter's book. So you've looked at some magazines. Before Graydon Carter goes to Vanity Fair, he formed a magazine called Spy. And at Christmas time, I showed you this. And of course, this is his Terry Garr talking about the 70s and Spy magazine, 1988. And I said that every magazine was different in how it presented the world. And Spy loved to cram their pages with little tiny, as you can see here, little tiny mosaics. That was kind of their style. Little lists. It's a satire magazine. So be very clear. Spy is close to National Lampoon in that it's comedy. Interview magazine was still going strong. There's Mike Nichols. Interview with Mike Nichols. Of course, Interview was founded by the great Andy Warhol. It's fun to look at this stuff. Here's an article on The Art of the Deal with Tony Schwartz. So See? Everything has a history. Everything has a story. Some things last forever. Well, that's actually not entirely true. Everything passes, of course. But sometimes it seems like some things go on forever. And sometimes feel that way. It's fun to look at these old pieces of paper. When a music would come out, they would advertise music. Here's a announcement of Anita Baker's new Giving You the Best That I Got by the great Anita Baker. A whole full page ad of her album. Imagine, you do an album and you have an ad. Bobby Brown, another great rhythm and blues icon. Here we go. Class act. 1990. Different era. Different era in so many ways, right, Mars? Or is it? That's what we'll find out. Anyhow, Graydon Carter's an interesting guy. He's I'm going to read from his book now. I'm going to talk about a little bit about his vision of what he wanted Vanity Fair to be. And of course, there's a little bit of a feud with Tina Brown of the New Yorker fame. He was at odds with her on many issues. Competition. But I'm going to open this up and see what we got here. This is interesting to read. Graydon Carter, as a prose stylist, is very... I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I don't want to be too hard on the man. What should I say about him? He's very much a reporter and a journalist in how he writes. It's very no nonsense and to the point. A lot of very simple declarative sentences, subject-verb sentences. Not much in the way of elaboration. Certainly nothing of complexity. And yet he tells a story in this book. He tells a story, not only his own personal story, but in many respects, like Chuck Klosterman's The 90s, he tells the story of an entire era. So if we go to the early part. So when he was the age, he's from Canada too. He's not American, which is also interesting. He's coming, like Paul Schaefer, like many people, Lorne Michaels of Saturday Night Live. I'm interested in Canadians coming over and making a splash in the U.S. and doing things in the U.S. and becoming almost identified with the U.S., even though they're not American, much like Lorne Michaels. I do have a book on Lorne Michaels. We'll get to that in a future episode, of course. I want to delve into Saturday Night Live a little bit. But he made a list at the age of 25 as of things he wanted to do with his life. Now, how many of you made lists? I got to tell you, I never once made a list like this of things I wanted to do. And amazing. Is that wrong of me to not have done that? My mind just doesn't work that way. I'm just not. My mind just doesn't work that way. It isn't that I don't work and I don't plan. It's just not so specific. And wouldn't you know it, this guy achieves every single one of these things. I take him at his word. He said, number 1, I want to live in New York, Greenwich Village specifically. Number 2, becoming the editor of a big general interest magazine. Number 3, being one half of a wonderful marriage. Number 4, having a large happy family and a dog. So he wrote that he wanted all those 4 things, and I guess he did get all of those 4 things. So sometimes it's a good idea to be specific in your goals, because you can achieve them. That's interesting. Okay, where are we here? I'm trying to find excerpts that describe one second. Okay, he says the first 2 years of Vanity Fair. Now, again, this is a guy that already had a long experience doing Spy magazine, this New York comedic, strange, undescribable magazine here, Spy. Also, The Observer, New York Observer. And then of course, he takes over Vanity Fair. So he says, he comes to Vanity Fair, and he again, I mentioned his prose style. He's very direct and very declarative. So here's an example. The first 2 years at Vanity Fair were pretty dreadful. The atmosphere was so poisonous, I wouldn't even bring my family into the office. The Tina Brown allies who had been left behind were deeply hostile and subversive. Readers were horrified by my editorial decisions, or so I was told by the holdover staff. And May remembers this time as the most hurtful in her life. Parentheses, and I went to an all-girls Catholic school with daughters of mafioso, unquote. So, that person that worked there said, it's so bad. It's even worse than when my Catholic school with mafia children in New York. The advertisers, many of whom had been the subjects of interest in Spy, were livid. Of course you're livid because, Graydon Carter had spent Spy magazine excoriating, attacking parts of corporate America in his satires there and criticizing Trump then and pretensions and all that. But, some of that's going to carry over, of course. My predecessor, Tina Brown, had done flattering cover stories on Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren, two of Vanity Fair's more prominent advertisers. I was not going to continue this trend. So he sees himself that he wants to change the course of this Vanity Fair, and he wants to redirect its energies. He says more than once in here that if you run a magazine, you have to have a point of view. And of course, he's hired by Cy Newhouse, who's a big Cy Newhouse, big figure in publishing and related endeavors in those years. He's painting a portrait of, again, a world. Let's peek into this world. Let's hear him talk about this world. The world of Condé Nast. If that means anything to you, Condé Nast. I was constantly worried that I was going to lose my job. The only encouragement I got was from Cy, the man who hired him. Right? An editor is only as good as the support of his or her proprietor. And here, Cy had no peers. If he ever wobbled over his decision to hire me, he never showed it. Here's the world here. It's a little passage to give you a sense. I can see it now, actually, as an ex-New Yorker. I can see what he's describing here. There was a newsstand. I was just talking about newsstands. There was a newsstand in the lobby of 350 Madison, run by a slightly quirky husband and wife pairing, Margaret and Helmut. Margaret and Helmut. She was on the large side and he was tall and thin. They were from the old country, though I was never sure which old country. That's good. They were from the old country, but I was never sure which old country. I give kudos to Carter for that. That's not all, prose. Not crazy about it, but there's some good. They were from the old country that I was never sure which old country. Germany seemed to be the consensus. Margaret and Helmut ruled the domain like the Ceausescus had Romania. Merely reaching for a magazine will result in a booming, "Are you going to buy that?" In other words, don't browse. You got to read. Are you going to buy? Can you imagine this couple? So I sort of feel like I met them. Why would I be in 350 Madison? Maybe with my dad. I know my dad went into prominent. I think my dad even went into 30 Rock for things. I don't remember. And I would be tag along. And so I sort of feel like I know this newsstand, this couple. Are you going to buy that? Okay. Most important, they knew everything that went on at Condé Nast long before anyone else did. Meaning that this newsstand couple, this German couple, knew the goings on at Vanity Fair and the New Yorker and the New York Magazine almost, by gossip or word of mouth. They knew before Graydon Carter he would know, or so he claims. I don't know. I think he exaggerates for dramatic excitement, but, literary excitement. The newsstand was on the right just before you turned the corner to go to the elevators. It was impossible to miss. Okay, some details of the era analog details. Here we go. Just before you got to them, there was one of those old-fashioned black address boards with horizontal seams and white plastic capital letters. So in that era, you would have in offices, he's describing the raw materials of what you would see in a building. See, you can see the white plastic capital spelling out executive names and their floor numbers, right? Size was at the top. And further down came the publishers and the editors. Every morning during those first couple of years, I would glance discreetly to my right to make sure that my name was still on the board. So he's so insecure, he wants to, am I there? Have they taken me off? Am I still have my job? Do I still have the gig? The anxiety of status, being in New York, being a person in his position. Again, Graydon Carter is one of the top people in that city. It's like being I don't know. It's like being a William Shawn, a New Yorker, that kind of thing, right? But he's still anxious, am I still here? I'm still here. Then I'd say hello to the Germans, Margaret and Helmut. I figured they would know first if I was on my way out. I'd be able to gauge my fortunes just by the looks on their faces. So he's looking at these people, this couple that owns this newsstand, to see if do I still have my gig. That's how tenuous I felt my residency at Vanity Fair was. So you get a sense of a world there. So in order to be a success at Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter does not just have to be clever and witty and intelligent. He doesn't just have to know how to edit copy so that it is entertaining and communicates with a readership. He has to be very politically savvy. So here's an example of that. So he has to make friends. Make friends influence people, as they say, right? So he says here, I got encouragement from others, including Diane von Furstenberg and Barry Diller. In 1986, John Wenner threw himself a birthday party at Canal Bar, Brian McNally's bustling new restaurant in Soho. Jan took over the whole place, covered the ceiling in balloons. Jan Wenner, of course, is the Rolling Stone guy. Guys started Rolling Stone, too, right? Jan took over the whole place, covered the ceiling in balloons, and summoned his crowd of bold-faced contemporaries. Barry and Diane, Calvin and Kelly Klein, Billy Joel, Malcolm Forbes, Amit and Mika Ertegun, Andy Warhol, Fred Hughes, Lorne Michaels, David Geffen, Paul Simon, and me. Jan put me beside Diane. And so he's just giving a sense that he's sort of being accepted. He's sort of Barry had just been named the president of Paramount Pictures, and so this is a world This is a world. And you know, I gotta respect Graydon Carter. He's very, in this text, in this memoir. Although on the one hand, I sort of, I'm not over, so we say I don't always love his approach. I do at the same time appreciate his candor, and also the way he declares or announces a thing. So here's an example of here. Oh, where are we here? Karl Lagerfeld, yeah. Karl Lagerfeld has a hotel, right? And he's having a party at Karl Lagerfeld. I don't know what year we're in. Are we in, is it the 80s or 90s? I don't know. I guess not, and then the early 90s, right? That evening at Karl's, I made my way around the tables looking for my place card. I began on the perimeter, figuring I would be seated with the wretched refuse of this fashion business. So the context is a fashion show. So he says, I knew that if I was at Vanity Fair, I had to attend all the fashion shows. And that's why he's at Karl Lagerfeld's event here at this hotel, you know. So he says fashion. So he figured he'd be seated with the refuse, you know, the unimportant. Again, Graydon Carter's, again, very preoccupied with how am I doing, you know, am I refuse or am I important, you know, etc. He finally found a seat, and wouldn't you know it, wasn't so bad, because he's being seated between two of the reigning supermodels of the time, Claudia Schiffer and Cindy Crawford. So whoever sat Mr. Graydon Carter sat him in between Cindy Crawford and Claudia Schiffer. So I would say to him, he complains a lot. He's anxious about his standing in society. That's fine, but you know, that's the worst fates for a dinner. I don't know. But then again, he's going to complain some more. So here we go. He says, I don't know about you, but in the presence of such epic beauty, I absolutely froze. I absolutely freeze, not froze. He uses the present. It means something he always does. I absolutely freeze. He can't handle it. I was completely at a loss for words. I mean, what exactly do you say to a supermodel? I did my best and was discussing something that seemed to completely bore Claudia when there was a commotion across the room. And so what was across the room is Richard Gere and Brian McNally standing face to face, about to get into a fight. So there's a lot of things like that in here, that them fighting, about to get in a fight. And here's the reason. Brian had closed his restaurant, and Richard's former girlfriend, Sylvia Martin, Richard Gere, the actor, had invested in the restaurant and lost all her money. And Richard was after Brian. Richard Gere was after Brian for the loss. So there's these little... They had to bring in security to break up this fight. I almost wept as Cindy Crawford, then married to Gere, was whisked away from my table, and then Claudia Schiffer. In their place glided the attractive actress and screenwriter from across the runway earlier in the day. I don't know who oh yeah. He's talking about, who's he talking about? The actress, actually, Kelly Lynch, that's right. And he mentions Cocktail, Drugstore Cowboy, and of course Roadhouse. Those three films. So this is an era where he's going to a dinner where Kelly Lynch is replacing Cindy Crawford to sit at the table with him. And so when he titles his book When the Going Was Good, it's not only a reference to the great Evelyn Waugh book of the same name, but it's also kind of a literal statement that his life was in some respects good, at least in part, if he's doing such things with his time when he's not Of course, it's hard work to run Vanity Fair, and we'll get into some of that. I don't want to say it's all. I'm going to take a drink of coffee here. I don't know, Laurie. He doesn't mention her once in this entire book, as far as I can. So I don't know. He does mention a lot of people. I don't know why. There's a lot of people. I mean, there's actually, I have it talking about Patricia Bosworth. As far as I know, as far as I recall. So he likes to name drop. Let's talk about writing a little bit. The way he writes about it isn't bad. He says, writing is a tough business. Writing is a tough business. It is. Especially the sort of detailed, rigorous, long-form narrative journalism that Vanity Fair came to be known for. So he's talking in here that writing is tough. It's a tough business. Tough, and it's a tough business. But he said, especially this kind of writing. And why is it tough? Because it's so fact-oriented and fact-obsessed. And it is. So, give you an example. Let's just take a random what he's talking about. Let's take this Vanity Fair. This is after Graydon Carter, but it's still... Meghan and Harry. Again, this is not a subject that interests me at all. It's great if you are so interested in your friend, but I'm not. I'm just letting you know. It's not because of the specificity of these two people. I'm using this as an example to talk about a kind of writing, an aesthetic of writing, in which you write about, public events in a certain way. So let's I'm just gonna, where are we here? I'm just gonna, this is how the article opens. This is written by Anna Peel, one of their top writers, and this is how she opens it. Again, this is a style. This is a. What I'm going to read you now is every bit as much a style of writing as, I don't know, as Henry James writing a portrait of a lady. Totally different, worlds apart even. But style, there's still very much styles of writing. So let's see what in. Graydon Carter's a style of writing too. We'll get back to him. Very declarative, The House proved it. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex could have it all. Their Montecito home offered all the fresh promises of a 21st century California mansion and the cloistering of a gated neighborhood from which they could emerge on their own terms. In the house's 13 fireplaces, described as, quote, mostly centuries-old examples brought over from France, unquote, there was even some European history, stripped of any potentially uncomfortable context. That's the first paragraph. So, second paragraph. At $14.65 million for more than 18,000 square feet, half the current median price per square foot in Montecito, Rockbridge was a steal. The area's fires and floods, along with the fact that the oligarch owner's romantic relationship had deteriorated to the point where he was compelled to offload far below market value, according to her source of knowledge, made the property just right for the Duke and Duchess, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It was the perfect launch pad for Archwell, their non-profit and entertainment studio, an approximation of part noblesse oblige, part aspiring, independently wealthy mogul model, one that Elizabeth, Charles, and William rejected by fiat during the January 2020 Sandringham Summit. So that's 2 paragraphs. Now, Graydon Carter says you got to have a point of view. And that's an interesting first 2 paragraphs, because it's at one and the same time doing a close reading of it. What Anna Peel is doing is giving you a point of view about this very famous couple, and yet a point of view absolutely drenched with fact about how many fireplaces and about who owned the place, and that, I don't know, that it was turned down, right? What does it say here? Yeah, Elizabeth, Charles, and William by fiat says, I don't, all these. So you're given an enormous amount of information about royalty and about a famous couple and about celebrity, and an enormous amount of facts about real estate and about a certain money milieu at our time now in both California and, I guess, London, England, California. And so what Graydon Carter doesn't exactly, well, he does say, we're back to his thing, why is writing hard? He says, detailed, rigorous, long-form narrative journalism. And this sort of reportage has its own unique set of demands. Vanity Fair writers were sent to the far corners of the earth to report. They would leave their families for weeks or months at a time and return home, and on deadline had to assemble all the reporting and write a good tale. So that's part of the value of Carter and Peel in this article, is that it be suspenseful, that it be gripping, that it have kind of, entice the reader, that it be a good tale. Profoundly, in many respects, 19th century values, not only 19th century, but it was predominant in that era. Write a good tale, almost like a condensed book. So it used to be like a novel or a book, except an article, right? But here's the thing I mentioned before. Every one of their facts had to be backed up by the researcher or researchers checking the article. And then the story had to be reviewed by the legal editor. Sometimes this process from idea to final copy would take 3 or 4 months. Stories that ran as long as 17,000 or 20,000 words might take even longer. And here are his rules. He states very, I say elegantly. Maybe I was too hard on him initially. Let's say, okay, Graydon Carter, there's some elegance, and here we go. If there was a scoop in a newspaper story, it's often in the first sentence. So I guess that's like a lead, right? First sentence. But that's a newspaper story, okay? If there was a scoop in a weekly magazine story, it's generally in the first paragraph, okay? We're in the world of this now. We're in the world of this, okay? Long-form magazine piece. But in the long-form magazine, the scoop could be in the 17th paragraph. So it's a style, it's a mode in which things can come much, much later. It's not so, I guess he's saying it's not so rigid or so authoritative. So that selection I just read, that might not even be what the story, yes, it's about Harry and these couple, but it actually might be about something totally different. Like maybe it's about their charity, or maybe it's about something in their marriage. I don't know. I don't want to, again, I confess I have not read that article because I have so many other things I want to read that interest me more. No offense to that couple. It could be in the 17th paragraph. So you got that? Could be. This is because the news break, the flashing zinger, right, has to take its place within the thread of the narrative. I believe that all great magazine stories must have a combination of the following elements. Narrative, that is to say, some parentheses, that is to say a beginning, a middle, and an end. Access to the principals, the people, or those on the immediate periphery of the principals. So that real estate mogul who sold that extravagant property, whoever that was, the principals, the people that said, no, I don't want this property, the other members of the family, principals. They have to be if they're not the principals, they've got to be people that know the principals. Business partners, relatives, spouses, lovers, girlfriends, boyfriends, principals, right? Conflict. Always a welcome addition, but then conflict. And disclosure. Moving the scholarship on the topic at hand along, in other words, new information. He says, goes on, you could get by with 3 of these necessities. So you don't need all of these, you just need just 3 of them. Of the things I just listed. Just 3. Don't have to have all of them. But with 4, you have a great chance at producing a memorable work of journalism. A perfect Vanity Fair piece would slip in somewhere between the news reports on a particular story and the inevitable book on it. Our articles were bolstered by on-the-spot reporting. We flew correspondents to wherever they needed to be, and by narrative skill and length. By the time we got to a story, there would often not only be a beginning and a middle, but also blessedly an end. The arc of the tale was set. Well, there's him giving you basically how a magazine, this type of magazine. He's the guy himself who created all this, telling you what they did. So if you have read an article in Vanity Fair, this is the building blocks, the construction of that thing you enjoyed if you read it, that piece, whatever it is, right? Okay. An article could be killed for various reasons. An article could be killed, but what are those reasons, right? Perhaps it didn't meet expectations, although that was a rare occurrence given the caliber of writer I worked with. So that's a possibility, but it's the least likely possibility because I'm working with, I'm working with Anna Peel, and I'm working with, we'll get to some names here. Dominic Dunn, who I'll talk about shortly. Dominic Dunn, the crime writer, true crime writer. Great stuff in here on him. I'll get one of my personal favorites, like Dominic Dunn. The OJ case is writers of that caliber, though, right? John Gregory Dunn, Joan Didion's husband, another great writer. These are all top people. People are good at something. He's saying, what are people that are good at? So this is a really important question in aesthetics. The people that are good at what they do, whether it's writing a magazine article, writing a piece of music, whatever it is, there are actually, literal ingredients, elements that make the thing, that make it good, that are kind of knowable, I think. I'm not saying always, and of course there is always, and I want to be very clear, I don't mean to, if you were to say to me, Mitch, isn't there a magical, mysterious dimension that can't be taught? Yes, I concede that, and yes, there are things that not everything can be analyzed and understood, but if you saw that in that passage I just read, he clearly, just like in piano, you just like the music here, there's certain qualities of chords and things that have to be right and melody. There's just these elements that can be discussed, analyzed, and taught. Those at very least have to be there. And this is what we're dealing with now. Have to be there. So these are the possibilities. And this, perhaps he goes on about what would kill a piece. In the course of closing our story, another magazine published one on the same subject that was just as good. This was another reason to kill it. So Vanity Fair was going to have this piece on OJ. Imagine an alternative world. Dominic Dunn is covering the OJ trial in the 90s, but over at New York Times, Seymour Hersh, I'm just pulling names out of a hat, got to OJ first, or I don't know, another writer. Don't hold me to these examples. And so they would have to kill it and concede. Tom Wicker, I don't know, whoever, I'm just pulling old names. Roger Gottlieb, I don't know. Names. There's a lot of names in this book. We'll get to some names here. So that's a kind of an ethical thing to do. Somebody else got there, you got to kill it. Also had to be as good. So it's not only that they got there first, but they did a good job. So he goes on to say, for writers not on contract, I had a rule that I wouldn't break. Even when the fortunes of magazines everywhere began their slide. So you notice that clause there? Even when the fortunes of So he's talking about the internet coming in and magazines beginning to slide. He's saying that even if it's 2007, 8, 9, those years, 10, 11, that in those years, if he's in charge, I never paid a kill fee, a staple of the business. A kill fee meant the writer generally got about a quarter of the amount the story was assigned for if it didn't run for one reason or another. I had been a writer. He was a writer. He wrote this book. I had been a writer in my recent previous life, that is not an editor, writer, and I knew just how brutal the whole ordeal was and how most in the trade lived from assignment fee to assignment fee. Whether we ran the story or not, the writer got paid in full. So kudos to you. I salute you, Graydon Carter. He had, it's a very pro-worker, pro-writer, pro-arts, pro-aesthetics point of view. And, for that reason alone, if nothing else, I kind of think that's why I'm doing this book on this episode. Again, all this stuff is nice, it's important, but that, yes, thank you. Writer got paid in full. The editor's job can also be likened to that of a choir master. So it's like leading a vocal music. You have all these disparate voices. It's the editor who must somehow join the gifted soloists together in an issue to form a sort of choral harmony. Some writers, especially the ones who had been editors in the past, were terrific at coming up with their own story ideas. Others relied on me, and the other editors had to come up with the ideas. And he's starting to mention names now. I said I would get to names, he'd get to names, because these names are important. Because some of these are really undersung artists, like, Marie Brenner. Marie Brenner, one of my favorites, and a master at the long-form journalism we practiced, had a habit of coming in with ideas that I thought were less than inspired. So he's saying that one of his favorite writers is Marie Brenner, and he's saying that she had a habit of coming in with things he didn't like. It's his favorite writer, and yet the ideas, he just, I don't like this idea. But wait, see? Less than inspired. On a couple of occasions, I got her off her notion by telling her that she was a home run hitter. You're a home run hitter, Marie. These metaphors, sports metaphors. Home run hitter, and that even if she did a brilliant job on the story she was suggesting, it could never be more than a double. You should never step up to the plate unless a home run is a possibility, I would tell her. Imagine your poor Marie Brenner. So he pays her fairly, but boy, he's tough. He's like, are you going to get a home run when you have this article? Are you going to get a home run? Marie would leave the office saying how right I was. And a day or two later, we'd come up with an idea that would allow her to hit another home run. What did she write? Why is Marie Brenner so great? Well, just wait. Marie's body of Vanity Fair work was extraordinary. She produced one explosive story after another, many of which were turned into films. So Michael Mann's 1999 film, The Insider, is based on Marie Brenner. Clint Eastwood's 2019 film, Richard Jewell. So Marie Brenner broke the tobacco corruption and scandal. She's the one that you could say Marie Brenner's responsible maybe for the world taking tobacco seriously. Maybe, I'm just saying. I don't know. Just one example. Maureen Orth, another great writer. I really like Maureen Orth. Of course, Bob Colacello, Andy Warhol's sidekick. Yeah. He says, in my early days, we had Bob Colacello, wonderful writer, social observer, and reporter. Maureen Orth, based in Washington, who wrote and Maureen Orth, of course, I guess is known for the Michael Jackson sexual abuse cases. And then, of course, Michael Lewis. Now, Michael Lewis might be the most famous because of The Big Short and Liar's Poker and all the problems of Wall Street and the 1%, as they say, and the billionaires and all that. Michael Lewis, finance running. He says, Michael Lewis joined Vanity Fair after the turn of the century and produced the most inventive magazine writing of our time. Now, here's a list of names. And I'm just going to indulge me. I'm just going to list all these writers because these people, they're not household names, but they ought to be. And every single one of these writers' names I'm going to mention, I've read all of them over the past 30 years, and they're worth reading. It says, over the years, we corralled some of the best writers, photographers, and illustrators in the magazine business at the time. Among the essayists and specialists were Christopher Hitchens. He says just Christopher. He's talking about A.A. Gill, James Wolcott, Fran Lebowitz, Michael Kinsley, Amy Fine Collins, Gore Vidal, Paul Goldberger, and Laura Jacobs. The ram of reporters, people just doing reporting, little different than articles or essays. Reporting, of course. What's this list of people? Really great. Robert Sam Anson, Judy Backrack, Peter Biskin. Peter Biskin, of course, is known for reporting on Hollywood in the 70s, with that great book on Hollywood in the 70s. Peter Biskin, Kara Swisher, technology writer, Buzz Bissinger, Howard Bloom, Patricia Bosworth. Here you go. Laurie, you are right. Patricia Bosworth's name has one mention. I had forgotten. So there you go. Ding, ding. There it is. Laurie's friend is mentioned here. Yeah, Patricia Bosworth. She's in between David Halberstam. Yeah. But let's look, she's not the only great. Look at this list of names. Scorvidor, look at this. It gets better. David Halberstam. Emily Jane Fox. Leslie Bennett. Andrew Leslie Coburn. Some of these names I cannot pronounce. Mark Bowden. Black Hawk Down, right? Mark Bowden, I think. Bowden. Kevin Sessoms. Sally Bettle Smith, Nick Toscas, wild writer, Carl Bernstein, Evan Wright, Nancy Jo Sales, Lily Analick. I've talked about Lily Analick, Eve Babbitts, Jim Dean mentioned her. Jim Windolf, The Partnership of Donald Bartlett and James B. Steele, William D. Cohen, Bethany McLean, Michael Wolff. I'm reading Michael Wolff now, interestingly enough. the interesting writer, Michael Wolff. Sarah Ellison, Susanna Andrews. Goes on. David Camp. And then, of course, the photographers. The best in the world, and he's right, Annie Leibovitz, Jonathan Becker, Bruce Weber, Helmut Newton, Herb Ritz, Mario Testino, Snowden, Todd Eberly, Larry Fink, Harry Benson, Timothy Greenfield Sanders, Mary Ellen Mark. Mary Ellen Mark is also a great documentary filmmaker. Love Mary Ellen Mark. Really, really great. Michael O'Neill. Goes on. So, I agree with him. And it's not for nothing that I have this. Now, I want people to know that I don't just like blondes. Here, I got this. Look at this. This is beautiful. Vanity Fair cover. Sofia Vergara by Annie Leibovitz. So I had this framed. So yes, there's that. Annie Leibovitz did many different kinds of work. Interesting photographer. What should we cover next? Where are we here? Oh, it's 6:11. Well, let's talk a little bit about Dominic Dunn. There's a little bit here about Annie Leibovitz. He said, if Cy wanted a writer or a photographer or an editor for that matter, he got it. So Cy was the head of things, and Cy got what he wanted, is what it said. After what he wanted. Kind of a little bit like Graydon Carter making that list. I want to be married by this such a year, and I want to live in New York. And his list when he was in his early 20s. Okay, where are we? Oh, you once had an annual contract negotiated with Vanity Fair's principal photographer. It came down to a $250,000 difference between what her agent demanded and what we were willing to pay. So Annie Leibovitz's agent, the one who did this wonderful portrait of Sofia Vergara. I also have another portrait of Jerry Hall that's incredible by her. And her agent saying $250,000. And that was, I guess, far outside or way above what Vanity Fair could do or would do. Cy says, give it to her. We don't want to nickel and dime them. So again, it's a culture at Vanity Fair, a culture of, well, they gave out, they gave manicures and pedicures to their staff, for crying out loud. This is not an ordinary company to work for, This is it calls it When the Going Was Good. It was very good. So I'm saying, paying Annie Leibovitz $250,000. And though she deserves it, of course, but that's interesting. So let's talk a little bit about Dominic Dunn. So integral to the magazine of those years. Here we go. Dominic Dunn was a significant element of the franchise that I inherited and was, for a long time, a huge asset to the magazine. He could be prickly. A lot of writers are prickly, I think. Especially to the younger staff, which I was not fine with. So he didn't approve of Dunn not treating the kids as well as he could have, I was not fine with it. But we needed him. And to a great extent, he needed Vanity Fair. The magazine's readers devoured his monthly dispatches from the 1993 trial of the Menendez brothers. It's been in the news again recently. Two rich kids from Southern California who shot their parents as they watched TV and ate ice cream. and he would soon become the most famous print journalist in the world for his monthly and ongoing and knowing coverage of the O.J. Simpson courtroom circus. One thing Nick brought to the murder stories was a defined moral stance. He wasn't objective, like most crime and courtroom reporters. He was there to defend the rights of the victims. This impulse went back to the tragedy of his daughter, Dominique, who was murdered by her boyfriend, John Thomas Sweeney. Sweeney was convicted of the murder and served a total of 3.5 years in prison. 3.5 years in prison. Writing about the case, Nick's first story for Vanity Fair had brought him back from a failed career as a film producer. The narrative arc was one that Hollywood would appreciate, as he went from alcoholism, a nervous breakdown, and the death of his daughter to a new career as a reporter and television star. And he did become a star in those years, and with his glasses, his round glasses. Vanity Fair writers like Nick were paid like no other writers. It's true. He was well on his way earning $500,000 a year, plus generous expenses, and months of free and continuous accommodation at the Chateau Marmont or the Beverly Hills Hotel during the Menendez and O.J. Simpson trials he covered for us, and later the trial of the music impresario Phil Spector, who shot a young actress, Lana Clarkson. We treated our stable of writers like the stars they were. So he treated them like stars. He's paying them very well. He's paying Annie Leibovitz $250,000 for an assignment. He's putting Dunn up at the Chateau Marmont, one of the most beautiful hotels in the United States, not just California, Los Angeles. Incredible hotel, as is the Beverly Hills Hotel. I've stayed at both. I'm just saying at 2 different times in my life, so I can vouch for the splendor of such places. So, we treat our stable of writers like the stars they were. This meant assigning them to diligent, talented editors and dispatching flowers or bottles of scotch at regular intervals. I bought Nick the same Christmas gift every year, 12 square dark blue Smithson notebooks with his name embossed on the covers. Each one had about 200 light blue pages. These books became a hallmark of his during the O.J. trial, as he made his copious notes. Nick had filled them all by the end of the trial, and I had to give him his next Christmas batch early that year. So that gives you a sense of those years and a particular, institution in a particular time. He acted some. He's in Ron Howard's movie, The Paper. I don't think according to this, he did not like being on screen very much. He didn't like having to perform with Jason Robards and Jude Law and Susan Sarandon. He's like, no, not he did it, but he was uncomfortable, I think. Interesting. He did a lot of movies according to this. He's in, yeah. libel battles and legal battles, of course, and interesting. Tom Shields, another great writer's mentioned here. Forgot Tom Shields. He ends his book discussing Anna Wintour, who he has a lot of praise. If he was critical of Tina Brown, he seems to have nothing but highest praise for Anna Wintour, in spite of other views from fictionalized accounts of her and recent Meryl Streep and others. And, seems to really like Anna Wintour. So it's really enjoyable to read about a different side to her. Here's this little bit of tidbit. People who think arriving late is a power move could take a lesson from Anna Wintour. Late is not a part of her arsenal. So Anna Wintour is of the school of thought of always arrive early. Late is not part of her arsenal, early is. So I agree with Anna Wintour on that, arriving early. She likes to play tennis in the morning and then get her hair done. I think I have that order right, before beginning her day. So, there's certain logic to that. When she began to spend more time on the organization of the Met Gala, the people at the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art would set the first meetings at 9 o'clock a.m. Anna would arrive at 8:45 a.m., which would cause the Met staff to scramble to establish a quorum. When they officially changed the time to 8:45, Anna would begin arriving at 8:30. So she keeps edging the time earlier and earlier, 8:30. This is great. More scrambling. The time just got earlier and earlier. Feel bad for the poor staff of the Metropolitan Museum. This is the sort of the aspect of Anna Wintour. The people, this woman, why is she doing this? The meetings by now may well have been pushed back to the evening before. This is a technique she also applied at Condé Nast. I was well aware of the early arrival act through friends at the Met. Near the end of my time at Vanity Fair, Anna's office called to request a meeting to discuss something. We set the get-together for 11 o'clock in the Vanity Fair conference room. At about 10:40, my assistant came into my office and in something of a panic said that Anna was already in there. I said, good. Ask her if she'd like anything and tell her I'll see her at 11 o'clock. I have never felt so brave and in control of a situation. So, it's a little that's this world I thought I would cover. It's a little bit, it makes sense to follow network television with this in a way, because we're dealing in this episode today with some very, very, there's no other word to describe it, very, very commercial matters. With celebrity and stars and things that are big events and big news. And yet within all that it's commercial and deals with big topics, as I listed all those writers' names, there's Marie Brenner's writing, The Insider, Tobacco, Big Tobacco. There's artfulness. There's in all of this stuff we're talking about today. So it has kind of a dual nature. It's popular and it's involves often gossip and news, but it's also, I guess it's a way of saying that in every endeavor of life, every field of life, there's a question of quality. And as he said, these are the rules if you're going to have a magazine piece. You have to have these things have to be in there. 3 or 4, was he 4 things he said. And I think that's probably true. There's probably an equivalent to that in every aspect of aesthetic life, artistic life. And today's Friday, and we have a weekend upon us. And I want to thank you for tuning in on this 20th episode of All About Aesthetics. The next installment of this All About Aesthetics is going to get back to some more. We're still going to deal with things, but we're gonna talk about some more, perhaps more philosophic, abstract matters, history of Romanticism, philosophy, things both popular and artistic, and maybe even some things I haven't thought of yet. We'll have to see. But thank you, and have a great weekend.